The thing about hospitals is that they're crawling with phonies. You see them in the VIP lounge crying into their expensive handkerchiefs, acting like they care about the person dying in the next room when really they're just worried about the inheritance. It depresses the hell out of me. I'm Dr. Evelyn Doyle. 18 years ago, my parents dumped me at a Greyhound station because I was too much for their perfect reputation. They drove off without even waving goodbye. Now the punchline is, they're back in my clinic begging me to save them. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. Let me tell you exactly how the tables finally turned. My office is on the 42nd floor of the St. Jude's Neurological Institute. From here, the city of Seattle looks like a circuit board, clean, organized lines of light moving in predictable patterns. There is no noise up here. The glass is 3 inches thick, designed to keep the wind and the sirens out. I like the silence. I paid a very high price for it. At 32, I am the youngest department head in the hospital's history. My colleagues call me brilliant. The interns call me terrifying. I don't mind either label. Both are useful. Competence is a shield, and I have forged mine out of titanium. I walked from my desk to the door, my heels clicking on the polished marble. As I passed the oil painting in the entryway, a generic abstract wash of blues and grays intended to soothe anxious families, I stopped. It was crooked, just slightly, maybe 2 millimeters down on the left side. To anyone else, it was invisible. To me, it was a scream. I reached out my fingers steady and nudged the frame until it was perfectly parallel with the crown molding. Order, symmetry, control. These aren't just preferences for me. They are the requirements for survival. If I can control the environment, I can control the outcome. My tablet buzzed in my pocket. A consult request from the ER. I stepped into the private elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. The doors slid shut, sealing me in a stainless steel box. It was just me and the hum of the cables. Then I looked down. On the floor near the corner lay a crumpled piece of paper. It wasn't medical waste. It was a bus ticket. Someone from the general public must have used this elevator by mistake, dropping it in their haste. It was dirty, stamped with a boot print, blue and white. Greyhound. The air in the elevator seemed to drop 20 degrees. The smell of antiseptic and floor wax vanished, replaced instantly by the smell of diesel fumes and wet wool. The elevator didn't move. I was 14 years old again. November, 18 years ago. The station was a concrete throat that swallowed people and spat them out. It was raining a freezing sideways rain that turned the pavement into a black mirror. The noise was physical, the hissing air brakes of the buses, the distorted announcements over the loudspeaker, the coughing of 100 strangers. I had my hands over my ears, pressing hard, trying to keep my head from splitting open. "Stop it, Evelyn. People are looking." That was my mother, Jean. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at her watch. She was wearing her beige trench coat, the one she only wore to church or funerals. She refused to make eye contact, staring instead at the destination board, as if the flickering yellow letters held the answers to her problems. "The noise," I whimpered. "It hurts." It wasn't a tantrum. It felt like someone was driving a spike through my left temple. The lights were too bright. The smells were too sharp. My brain felt like a radio tuned to static at maximum volume. "We can't handle this anymore," my father said. Arthur Doyle stood 3 feet away from me. He wasn't touching me. He held the handle of my suitcase, a battered floral thing that used to belong to my aunt. He looked tired, not sad, just exhausted. He looked like a man who had been trying to fix a leaky pipe for 10 years and had finally decided to just sell the house. "We have to think of your sister," he said, his voice flat. "She's scared of you, Evie. You're erratic. You're dangerous." "I'm not," I tried to say, but the words got caught in the sob rising in my throat. He set the suitcase down on the wet concrete. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a white envelope. "There's $50 in there, and the ticket to your Aunt Miller's in Boise. She's expecting you." I knew Aunt Miller. She didn't want me. She had told them that on the phone last Christmas. "Send her if you have to, but don't expect me to mother her." "Dad, please," I whispered. I reached for his sleeve. The fabric of his coat was damp. He pulled his arm away. He didn't shove me. He just withdrew like I was contagious. "It's for the best," Jean said, still looking at the board. "You need structure. We can't give you what you need." They didn't hug me. They didn't wait for me to board. Arthur turned around, put his hand on the small of Jean's back, and guided her toward the parking lot. I stood there 14 years old in a hoodie that wasn't warm enough, clutching a one-way ticket. I watched them walk away. I watched them get into the sedan. I watched the brake lights flare red, two angry eyes in the dark, and then fade as they turned onto the highway. I stood there until my fingers were numb and the diesel fumes made me sick. I realized then that love wasn't unconditional. It was a contract, and I had breached it. Ding. The elevator doors slid open, jerking me back to the present. I gasped, sucking in a lungful of filtered hospital air. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a staccato rhythm of panic I hadn't felt in years. I leaned against the metal wall for a second, closing my eyes, forcing the 14-year-old girl back into the dark where she belonged. "Count backward," I told myself. 5, 4, 3. I opened my eyes. I was Dr. Evelyn Doyle. I was safe. I was wealthy. I was untouchable. I stepped over the dirty bus ticket and walked out into the lobby. I pulled my tablet from my lab coat pocket to check the consult that had come in. I needed work. Work was the antidote to memory. I needed a complex case, a stroke, a tumor, something that required my hands and my mind to work in perfect unison. I tapped the screen to open the patient file. Patient name, Doyle Arthur. Dope 03-12-1958. Admittant physician, Dr. K. Lewis, ER. Chief complaint, rapid onset, cognitive decline, severe aggression, paranoia. I stopped walking. The lobby was bustling, nurses pushing wheelchairs, visitors carrying flowers, the low murmur of receptionists, but the sound drained away. Arthur. It couldn't be. There were thousands of Doyles in Seattle. But the date of birth stared back at me. March 12th. I remembered the cake we bought for his 40th birthday. I remembered the way he scraped the icing off because it was too sweet. I scrolled down to the insurance information. Next of kin Jean Doyle. The tablet felt heavy in my hand. My blood ran cold, then hot. They were here, in my hospital, in my kingdom. He was sick. The man who had called me dangerous and erratic was now being admitted for aggression and decline. Ethically, I was required to recuse myself. The American Medical Association is very clear on treating family members. It compromises objectivity. It clouds judgment. I should tap the refer to colleague button. I should assign this to Dr. Yang or Dr. Richards and never step foot on the third floor. I looked at the Accept Case button. It pulsed green on the screen. If I walked away, I would never know. I would never know if he remembered the bus station. I would never know if they regretted it. But if I took the case, I would have access. I would have his charts, his scans, his mind laid bare on a monitor. I could see exactly what was breaking inside him. I felt a smile touch the corner of my mouth. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a scientist who had finally found the missing variable in a long, painful equation. I tapped accept. Dr. Doyle, a nurse called out as I approached the intake desk. We were just about to page the on-call resident for bed 3. I shook my head, sliding the tablet back into my pocket. I smoothed the front of my white coat. No need, I said, my voice steady, professional, and completely hollow. I'll handle this one, personally. The observation deck of the Saint. Jude's neurology wing is not a place for viewing scenery. It is a windowless, temperature-controlled bunker lined with banks of high-definition monitors. From here, the senior staff can observe patient behavior in the VIP suites without disturbing the clinical environment. It is a tool for diagnosis designed to catch the tremors, the tics, and the sundowning that patients often hide when a doctor is in the room. I stood in the dark, the blue light of the screens washing over my face. My hands were clasped behind my back. I was the only one in the room. I had dismissed the residents, telling them I needed to review the intake footage alone for sensitive privacy reasons. On screen 4, the feed was live. The VIP suite was larger than my first apartment. It had mahogany wainscoting, a sleeper sofa for guests, and a view of the Sound. But despite the luxury, the air in the room seemed thin, sucked dry by the tension between the two people occupying it. Arthur was pacing. He was wearing a hospital gown that was tied incorrectly in the back, exposing a strip of pale, vulnerable skin. He looked smaller than I remembered. The Arthur Doyle of my memory was a monolith, broad-shouldered, smelling of cedar and authority. The man on the screen was withered. His shoulders curved inward as if his chest had caved in under the weight of gravity. He walked with a shuffling, uncertain gait, stopping every few feet to pick at the sleeve of his gown. "They took it," he said. The audio feed was crystal clear. His voice was raspy, stripped of its old baritone boom. "The girl with the red shoes. She took my wallet." Jean was sitting on the edge of the sleeper sofa. She didn't look up from her phone. "No one took your wallet, Arthur. It's in the safe at home." "Liar." Arthur spun around. The aggression was sudden, a flash of lightning in a clear sky. He slammed his hand onto the bedside table, rattling the water pitcher. "You're in on it. You want the money." "You always wanted the money." I zoomed in on Jean. Time had been expensive for my mother. Her hair was a chemically perfect shade of blonde, stiff with hairspray. Her face was smooth, pulled tight by a surgeon's scalpel, giving her a permanent expression of mild surprise. She wore a heavy gold chain-link bracelet that clattered against her phone case. She didn't flinch at his outburst. She didn't go to him. She didn't offer a soothing hand or a soft word. Instead, she stood up and walked to the door of the suite, cracking it open to peek into the hallway. "Arthur, stop shouting," she hissed, closing the door and turning back to him. "People can hear you. It's embarrassing." I felt a cold, hard knot tighten in my stomach. 18 years and nothing had changed. The diagnosis was different. The setting was different, but the core priority remained exactly the same: maintain the perimeter, protect the reputation, hide the mess. When I was 14, my mess was sensory overload and panic attacks. I embarrassed them at church, I embarrassed them at the country club. So, they cut me out like a tumor. Now Arthur was the embarrassment. He was the one making scenes, shouting accusations, cracking the porcelain veneer of their perfect life. I want the police. Arthur muttered, his rage dissolving into confusion. He sat on the bed looking lost. I need to call the police. Just sit down, Jean snapped. She checked her reflection in the darkened window, smoothing her blouse. The specialist is coming. Please, for the love of God, try to act lucid. If they think you're crazy, they'll send you to a home. And I am not driving to a home every Sunday. I watched her for a moment longer. I studied the selfishness etched into the corners of her mouth. She wasn't worried about his brain dying. She was worried about her Sunday schedule. I turned away from the monitors. The observation phase was over. It was time to enter the cage. I stopped in the scrub room adjacent to the suite. My heart rate was 64 beats per minute, steady, clinical. I removed my white coat and hung it on the hook. I put on a fresh set of navy blue surgical scrubs. I tied a surgical cap over my hair, pulling it low to cover my forehead. Then I put on a mask. It covered my nose, mouth, and chin, leaving only my eyes visible. I took my ID badge, the one that read, Dr. Evelyn Doyle, Chief of Neurology, and flipped it backward on its lanyard. Now it was just a blank white rectangle. I wasn't their daughter right now. I was the lead specialist. I was the authority. And they were on my turf. I picked up a metal clipboard loaded with the standard cognitive assessment forms and pushed through the door into the suite. The smell hit me, first faint urine, masked by heavy floral perfume, the scent of decay trying to pass as a garden. Good afternoon, I said. My voice was muffled by the mask deeper than usual. I kept my eyes on the clipboard, refusing to make contact yet. I'm the lead specialist for the unit. I need to conduct a preliminary cognitive assessment. Jean stood up immediately. She put on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, thank goodness, she said, smoothing her skirt. He's been agitated. It's the stress. He's usually very sharp. I looked up then. I looked directly at her. For a split second, I held my breath. I waited for the spark of recognition, the widening of the eyes, the gasp. I have her eyes after all. The same steel gray irises, but Jean didn't see me. She saw a blue scrub cap and a mask. She saw a functionary, a service provider. She looked right through me, just as she had at the bus station. We'll see, I said. I turned to Arthur. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, picking at the blanket. He looked up at me with watery, vacant eyes. There was no recognition there either, just fear. Mr. Doyle? I said, stepping into his personal space. I'm going to ask you a few questions. Is that all right? Who are you? He asked. Did you bring my wallet? I'm the doctor, I said. I want you to listen carefully. I'm going to say 5 words. I want you to repeat them back to me immediately and then remember them for later. He scowled but nodded. Face, velvet, church, daisy, red. Arthur blinked. Face, velvet, church, daisy, red. Good, I said, marking the paper. Now I want you to do some math for me. I'm an accountant. Arthur spat. I know math better than you do. Excellent. Then this should be easy. I want you to start at 100 and subtract 7. Then keep subtracting 7 from the answer until I tell you to stop. Arthur straightened up, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. 93. He paused, his brow furrowed, his lips moved silently. 85. Not quite, I said softly. Try again. 93 minus 7. 86, he barked. Good, keep going. 86 minus 7 is... He stared at his hands. His breathing grew shallow. The silence stretched out heavy and suffocating. 70. 9. Keep going. 72. One more. I don't know, Arthur shouted. He grabbed the plastic water pitcher from the bedside table and hurled it across the room. It smashed against the wall, spraying water over the expensive leather armchair. It's a stupid test. Who counts backwards by 7? It's a trick. Jean let out a small shriek, jumping back from the spray. Arthur, stop it. Arthur was panting, his face mottled red. Get her out of here. She's trying to confuse me. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I made a calm, precise note on the clipboard. Impulse control failed. Frustration tolerance 0. I turned slowly to face John. She was dabbing at water on her blouse with a tissue, looking mortified. I am so sorry, doctor. He's just tired. He's never like this. This was the moment. The trap. I stepped closer to her, invading her social distance just enough to be uncomfortable. Mrs. Doyle, I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly serious. This level of aggression and cognitive rigidity is significant. It suggests frontal lobe involvement. I paused, locking eyes with her. I need to know the history. Has Arthur ever displayed episodes of uncontrollable rage before? Has he ever been irrational or detached or cruel? Perhaps in his 30s or 40s. The room went silent save for Arthur's heavy breathing. Jean froze. I watched the gears turn behind her eyes. I knew the truth. I knew about the time he threw the Christmas tree out the front door because the lights were blinking too fast. I knew about the time he dragged a screaming 14-year-old through a bus station because he couldn't handle her noise. I knew that his sternness had always been a mask for a brain that was slowly misfiring. If she told the truth now, she would have to admit that her husband had been unstable for decades. She would have to admit that their life had been a minefield. Jen straightened her spine. She lifted her chin. No, she said firmly. Never. Arthur has always been a gentleman, a perfect father. Stern, yes, but very controlled. We have always been a normal, happy family. This behavior, this is brand new. The lie hung in the air, glittering and toxic. She was protecting the narrative even now. She was erasing my entire childhood to save face in front of a stranger in a surgical mask. She would rather lie to a doctor and risk her husband's treatment than admit that their perfect family was a sham. I felt a strange sense of relief. The last shred of doubt, the tiny childish hope that maybe they had missed me, or maybe they had changed, evaporated. They were irredeemable. I gripped the clipboard until my knuckles turned white under the latex gloves. Thank you, Mrs. Doyle, I said. That is very illuminating. I wrote a new order at the bottom of the page. I didn't write it for the insurance company. I wrote it for me. Order C9 ORF 72 expansion analysis. It wasn't a standard test for dementia. It was a specific genetic probe for a hereditary mutation. The same mutation that had been diagnosed in me when I was 22, alone in a university clinic. I'm ordering a specialized panel, I said, tearing the sheet off the clipboard. We need to look at the genetics. Sometimes the body remembers things the family chooses to forget. Jean frowned, not understanding the threat hidden in the promise. Whatever is necessary. We have excellent insurance. I'm sure you do, I said. I turned and walked out of the room, the plastic door swinging shut behind me, sealing them back in their glass cage. I had the evidence. Now I just needed the science to load the gun. It took 4 hours for the genetic sequence to come back from the rapid response lab. In the world of commercial medicine, a full genetic workup takes weeks. In my world, the world of VIP retainers and 7-figure endowments, it takes as long as I say it takes. I sat in my office, the only light coming from the glow of my desktop monitor. The results were displayed in a simple color-coded PDF. Marker C9ORF72 expansion. Results positive. Repeat count high. It was the smoking gun. It was the answer to a question I had asked the universe 18 years ago while shivering on a plastic bench in Boise, Idaho. Why am I like this? I printed the report. I picked up the hard copy film of Arthur's MRI. I didn't need to look at it again. The image of his atrophied frontal lobes was burned into my retina, but I needed the prop. I needed the physical weight of the evidence. I walked down the hallway. The night shift had started. The lights were dimmed to a low, soothing amber. The hospital was quiet, breathing in the rhythmic hiss of ventilators and the hum of monitors. I reached Suite 404. I didn't knock. Inside the room was steeped in shadow. The only illumination came from the vitals monitor and a small reading lamp by the sleeper sofa. Arthur was asleep, finally sedated by the cocktail of lorazepam and haloperidol I had authorized. He looked peaceful, his mouth slightly open, the rage chemically scrubbed from his face. Jean was awake. She was sitting exactly where I had left her, flipping through an architectural digest, though I doubted she was reading it. She looked up as I entered, her expression tight with impatience. "It's almost 10 o'clock, she said, closing the magazine with a snap. "We've been waiting for hours. Is this how you treat premium patients?" I closed the door behind me. I locked it. The click was loud in the quiet room. "Medical thoroughness takes time, Mrs. Doyle," I said. My voice was still muffled by the mask. I walked to the foot of the bed and placed the thick file on the rolling table. I adjusted the monitor on the wall, waking the screen so it cast a harsh blue light over the room. Jean squinted against the glare. "Well," she demanded, "do you have a diagnosis? Can we give him a pill and go home?" "I have a diagnosis," I said, "but you aren't going home." Jean stood up, her bracelets jangling. "Excuse me, you are a specialist, not a jailer. If you can't help him, we will transfer him to Swedish or UW. I won't be spoken to like this by a technician." "I'm not a technician, Jean." I reached up behind my head and untied the strings of my surgical mask. The paper fell away, revealing my nose, my mouth, my chin. I pulled the scrub cap off, letting my dark hair fall around my shoulders. I looked at her. I didn't smile. I didn't scowl. I just let her see me. Jean stared. She blinked once, twice. Her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. She was looking for the stranger she had met earlier, trying to reconcile the face of the doctor with the catalog of faces in her memory. Then recognition hit her like a physical blow. Her hand flew to her throat. She took a stumbling step back, her heel catching on the carpet. "Evelyn." The word was a whisper, breathless and terrified. It wasn't the sound of a mother finding a lost child. It was the sound of a woman seeing a ghost. "Hello, Mother," I said. The word tasted like ash. Jean's shock instantly curdled into defense. Her eyes darted from me to the locked door, then to Arthur's sleeping form. You work here?" Her voice rose shrill and jagged. "We didn't know." How could we know you never called? You never. I'm the chief of neurology. I cut in my voice level. You brought him to my hospital. This is entrapment, she hissed, regaining her footing. She pointed a manicured finger at me. You can't treat him. It's illegal. It's a conflict of interest. You're biased. You hate him. I don't hate him, I said calmly. I pity him. I want a new doctor. She was shouting now, not caring about the scene she was so afraid of earlier. I want the administrator. You are not touching him. You were unstable then, and you're probably unstable now. I remember you, Evelyn. I remember the screaming. I remember the violence. I remember it too, I said. I stepped closer to the bed, putting myself between her and Arthur. I remember the bus station. I remember the $50. I remember you telling me I was too much for a normal family. We did what we had to do, Jean screamed. You were tearing us apart. You were dangerous. We had to protect your sister. We gave you a chance at a new life. And look at you. You're a doctor. You should be thanking us. It was an impressive display of cognitive dissonance. In her mind, the abandonment was a virtuous act of tough love that had produced a successful result. I am a doctor, I agreed. And because I am a doctor, I finally understand what happened in this family. I turned to the wall monitor. With a few keystrokes, I pulled up Arthur's MRI. The image of his brain floated in the air, a gray walnut with dark hollow voids. Look at the screen, Jean. I don't want to see. Look at it. My voice cracked like a whip. She flinched and looked. This is your husband's brain, I said, pointing to the gaping black spaces in the frontal and temporal lobes. This isn't Alzheimer's. This isn't normal aging. This is frontotemporal dementia, specifically the behavioral variant. I tapped the screen. It strips away empathy. It destroys impulse control. It creates rigidity, obsession, and rage. It turns people into monsters because the part of the brain that makes them human is dissolving. Jean crossed her arms, hugging herself. So he's sick. That's what I told you. Fix him. It's genetic, John. I threw the genetic report onto the bed. It landed on Arthur's legs. He stirred but didn't wake. It's a mutation on chromosome 9, the C9orf72 expansion. It is dominant. If you have the gene, you get the disease. Jean stared at the papers. So, what does that matter? It matters, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. Because of the timeline. I walked over to the window, looking out at the city lights, turning my back on her for a moment. When I was 14, I said, I started having trouble with noise. The sound of chewing, the sound of traffic, it felt like physical pain. I became aggressive. I couldn't focus. I had panic attacks that looked like rage. Because you were difficult, Jean spat. You were a rebellious teenager. I turned back to face her. No, I said. I was symptomatic. The room went deadly silent. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to roar. John froze. What? I ran my own DNA alongside his, I said. I have the marker gene. I have the C9orf72 expansion. I inherited it from him. I walked slowly toward her, watching the blood drain from her face. The behavioral issues you punished me for. The screaming, the aggression that wasn't rebellion. That was the juvenile onset of the exact same disease that is killing him right now. Jean shook her head, a jerky mechanical motion. No, that's not possible. The doctors said it was behavioral. They said you were acting out for attention. They were wrong, I said ruthlessly. And you were negligent. You didn't take me to a neurologist. You took me to a bus station. I gestured to the sleeping man. You see him now. You see the confusion, the sensory overload, the anger. That was me. I wasn't a bad kid, Mother. I was a sick child. I was suffering from a neurological degenerative condition, and instead of getting me help, you threw me away like garbage. The realization hit her. I saw it happen. I saw the wall of denial crack. If I was just a rebellious brat, she was justified. She was the victim. But if I was sick, if I had a physical genetic disease, then she was a monster. She wasn't a protective mother. She was a predator who had culled the weak from the herd. We didn't know, she whispered. Her voice trembled. Evelyn, we didn't know. You didn't want to know, I corrected. It was easier to blame me than to look at him, because he was like this back then too, wasn't he? The rigidity, the coldness. You recognized the symptoms in me because you had been living with them in him for years. You hated me because I was becoming him. Jean sank onto the sofa. She looked old. The plastic surgery couldn't hide the terror in her eyes. The narrative she had built her life around, the story of the martyr, mother dealing with the demon child, had just been incinerated by a single strand of DNA. Is he, she gestured weakly to Arthur, is he going to die? Yes, I said. There is no cure. The brain atrophy is irreversible. He will lose his language. He will lose his ability to swallow. He will forget how to breathe. And you, she asked, looking up at me, if you have it? I was lucky, I lied. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of my own medical reality. I wasn't going to let her pity me. My onset was juvenile and episodic. It stabilized, but I carry the gene, and so does my sister. Did you ever test her? Or is she just perfect because she learned to be quiet? Jean covered her mouth with her hand. She started to cry. It wasn't a pretty cinematic cry. It was an ugly, gasping sob. I didn't know, she kept repeating. I didn't know. Ignorance is not a defense in a court of law, I said, leaning against the counter, crossing my arms over my chest. And it certainly isn't a defense in this hospital. I looked down at Arthur. He was drooling slightly onto the pillowcase. I felt a strange, cold detachment. The man wasn't a villain anymore. He was just a carrier, a vector for a disease that had destroyed 2 lives, his and mine. But Jean was the one who drove the car. Jean was the one who bought the ticket. You have a choice to make, Mrs. Doyle, I said, switching back to my professional title to create distance. She looked up, her mascara running. What choice? I can transfer him, I said. There is a state facility in Tequila. It's understaffed. It smells like bleach and despair. He will be medicated and kept in a room with 3 other screaming men. That is the standard of care for patients without an advocate. John paled. You wouldn't. Why wouldn't I asked softly. It's what you did to me. You sent me away to be someone else's problem. It would be poetic justice to send him away to be the state's problem. He's your father, she pleaded. He's a patient, I snapped. Do not confuse biology with family. We established at the Greyhound station that we are not family. I let the threat hang there. I wanted her to feel the weight of it. I wanted her to feel the absolute powerlessness I had felt watching their taillights fade. I held her future in my hands. I could destroy them both with a single signature. Or, I said, I can treat him. Jean stopped crying. She looked at me with pathetic hope. I can admit him to the Platinum Wing. I continued. I can give him the experimental stabilizers. I can manage his pain. I can give him dignity as he dies. Please, she whispered. Please, Evelyn. I'm not doing it for you, I said, and I'm not doing it for him. I walked to the door and unlocked it. I put my hand on the handle. I'm doing it because I need to prove something, I said, looking back at her one last time. I need to prove that the bad seed is the only one in this room with a soul. I opened the door. Mrs. Harrow is coming in with the paperwork. Don't lie to her, Jean. She remembers you too. I left the door open. It was a small petty act of defiance. For 18 years, my life had been defined by closed doors, the closed door of the sedan, the closed door of the foster home, the closed door of my own guarded heart. Leaving the sweet door open now felt like tearing down a wall. It let the sounds of the hospital drift in the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, the distant chime of an elevator, the rhythmic paging of a resident to the ER. The world was still turning outside, but inside, sweet 404 time had stopped. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms over my chest, watching Jean. She hadn't moved from the sofa. She looked smaller now, as if the air pressure in the room had increased, crushing her down into the cushions. Her face, usually a mask of practiced socialite boredom, was cracked wide open. She looked at Arthur, then at me, then back at Arthur. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy. It was filled with the debris of the truth I had just detonated. You can't prove it, Jean whispered. It was a weak, instinctive parry. She was arguing with gravity. You can't prove that's why you were the way you were? I don't have to prove it to a jury. John, I said, my voice dropping from the sharp edge of command to a dull, tired flatline. I just proved it to you, and deep down you know it's true. You remember the blank stares he gets? I had them too. You remember the sudden rage over noises? I had that too. You didn't exile a bad child. You exiled a symptom. Jean flinched. She picked up her purse, clutching it to her chest like a shield. We were scared, she said. Her voice wavered, losing its polished edge. You burned the curtains in the living room. You screamed for 3 hours because the vacuum cleaner was on. We were terrified of you. I wasn't burning the curtains because I was an arsonist, I said, looking at the floor, remembering the terror of that day. I was burning them because the pattern was moving. My visual cortex was misfiring. I was hallucinating. A simple anticonvulsant would have stopped it. But you didn't ask a doctor. You asked a priest, and then you asked a bus driver. We thought. She stopped. She looked at Arthur, who let out a soft, rattling snore. We thought we were saving the family. You saved the furniture, I said. You didn't save the family. I watched her crumble. It wasn't a dramatic, sobbing collapse. It was a slow, structural failure. Her shoulders slumped. The hand clutching the purse relaxed. The denial, that fierce, blinding force that had allowed her to sleep at night for 2 decades, was finally running out of fuel. She looked at the man she had protected, the man she had chosen over her own daughter. And she saw him for what he was, the source of the rot. I felt a strange lack of satisfaction. I thought this moment would feel like victory. I thought watching her realize her mistake would feel like champagne. Instead, it just felt exhausting. It felt like standing in the wreckage of a house that had burned down a long time ago. Footsteps approached from the hallway. Slow, deliberate, heavy footsteps. I turned my head. Mrs. Harrow was walking toward the suite. She was the hospital's senior administrator of patient accounts, a woman who had been working at St. Jude's since before the building had Wi-Fi. She was 65 with steel gray hair, pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that had seen every variation of human misery and insurance fraud imaginable. She wore comfortable orthopedic shoes and a cardigan that had seen better days. She held a thick clipboard against her chest. "Dr. Doyle," she said, nodding to me as she reached the door. "I have the power of attorney forms and the insurance authorization for the intake." "Thank you, Mrs. Harrow," I said, stepping aside to let her in. Mrs. Harrow walked into the room with the efficiency of a woman who had no time for drama. She placed the clipboard on the rolling table next to the genetic report. She adjusted her glasses, uncapped a pen, and turned to Jean. "Mrs. Doyle," she began, her tone professional. "I need your signature on—" Mrs. Harrow stopped. She was staring at Jean. The pen hovered in the air. Jean looked up, wiping a smudge of mascara from her cheek. She tried to compose herself, forcing a shaky smile. "Yes. Where do I sign?" Mrs. Harrow didn't move. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing behind her bifocals. She wasn't looking at the wealthy woman in the Chanel suit. She was looking through the layers of time. "I know you," Mrs. Harrow said. It wasn't a question. Jean blinked. I don't think so. We haven't been to this hospital in years." "November," Mrs. Harrow said. She said the word like she was reading a tombstone. 2006. It was raining. You were wearing a blue raincoat. You came in with a teenage girl. The air in the room seemed to vanish. I stiffened against the doorframe. I hadn't told Mrs. Harrow anything. I hadn't told anyone at the hospital about my past. To them, I had sprung fully formed from medical school. Jean went pale. I don't know what you mean." She was wearing a gray hoodie. Mrs. Harrow continued, her voice devoid of its usual administrative crispness. It was soft now, laced with a memory that had clearly stuck with her. "She was sitting in the lobby near the vending machines. You and your husband were in with the billing department arguing about a CT scan deductible." Mrs. Harrow turned her head and looked at me. Her eyes widened slightly as she connected the dots, the teenage girl from the lobby and the chief of neurology standing in the doorway. She turned back to Jean. The professionalism was gone. In its place was the cold judgment of a witness. "You left her there," Mrs. Harrow said. "You went to lunch at the cafe across the street. You left her sitting on the floor for 3 hours. She was shaking. Her teeth were chattering." Jean stammered. "We were stepping out to discuss our options." "I bought her a ginger ale," Mrs. Harrow said, "and a bag of pretzels, because she looked like she was going to pass out. I sat with her for 20 minutes until security told me I had to get back to my desk. She told me her head hurt. She told me the lights were too loud." Mrs. Harrow took a step closer to the sofa. I remember thinking, who leaves a sick child on a linoleum floor? And then you came back, you grabbed her by the arm, and you dragged her out the door. I never saw an admission record. I checked the logs for weeks. Jean made a sound, a small, strangled whimper. She pressed her hand over her mouth. This was the blow that finally landed. My accusations she could dismiss as the rantings of an estranged, biased daughter. But this was an independent observer. This was history recording her crime. Mrs. Harrow was the impartial judge who had seen the cruelty when no one was watching. "It wasn't like that," Jean sobbed into her hand. "But the lie was feeble. It died in the air before it reached us." It was exactly like that, Mrs. Harrow said. She looked at me. There was no pity in her eyes, only a fierce, quiet respect. I wondered what happened to that girl. I worried about her. She survived, I said. My voice was thick, hard to get out of my throat. Mrs. Harrow nodded. She looked back at Jean, her face hardening into stone. Here are the forms, she said, dropping the clipboard onto the table with a loud thwack. Sign the bottom line. It authorizes Dr. Doyle to make all medical decisions regarding the patient. Or don't sign it and you can explain to the ethics board why you are refusing care for a man with a terminal genetic condition. Jean looked at the clipboard. She looked at the pen. She looked at Mrs. Harrow, who stood over her like a vengeful librarian, and she realized there was no exit. The social veneer had been stripped away. She was naked in the light of the truth. "I'm sorry," Jean whispered. She wasn't apologizing to me. She was apologizing to the universe, hoping it would stop crushing her. She picked up the pen. Her hand shook so badly the tip tapped a staccato rhythm against the paper. I watched her sign. I watched her surrender control. Mrs. Harrow took the clipboard back. She checked the signature, then walked over to me. She stopped in the doorway, inches from my face. "Dr. Doyle," she said softly, "do you need me to call security to escort her out?" "No," I said. I looked at Jean weeping silently on the sofa, a broken woman in expensive clothes. "She's not a threat anymore. She's just a visitor." Mrs. Harrow patted my arm a single firm touch and walked out into the hallway, taking the ghosts of the past with her. I was left alone with them. The silence returned, but it was different now. It wasn't the silence of secrets. It was the silence of a grave that had finally been filled in. I walked over to the bed. I looked down at Arthur. I looked at the signature on the clipboard. I had the power now. I had the legal right to decide his fate. I could do anything. I could do nothing. I picked up the pen Jean had dropped. It was still warm from her hand. The pen felt heavy in my hand, not with the weight of ink and metal, but with the specific crushing gravity of choice. I looked down at the clipboard. Jean's signature was a spiderweb of trembling ink on the bottom line, surrendering all medical and legal authority to me. With that scrawl, she had ceased to be the matriarch. She was just a bystander. I was the judge. I stared at the blank space under disposition plan. I knew the codes by heart. I could write transfer to state facility, Tukwila Annex. I knew what that looked like. I had done my residency rotations there. It was a place where the air smelled of boiled cabbage and neglected bodies. It was a place where patients were strapped to beds to keep them from wandering, where they sat in soiled briefs for hours because the night staff was overwhelmed. It was a warehouse for the forgotten. It would be justice. It would be a mirror image of the Greyhound station, cold, loud, terrifying, and lonely. I could send Arthur there. I could send him to die in the dark, wondering why no one came for him, just as I had sat on that bench, wondering why the sedan never turned back. Jeanne was watching me. She was hugging her purse, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. She knew what I was thinking. She was waiting for the executioner's axe to fall. She expected cruelty because cruelty was the language she understood. It was the language she had taught me. I looked at Arthur. He shifted in his sleep, a low moan escaping his lips. His brain was shrinking. The neurons that held his memories, his pride, and his cruelty were dissolving into fluid. He wasn't the man who dragged me by the arm anymore. He was just a biological machine that was breaking down. If I sent him to Tukwila, I would be punishing a ghost. And more importantly, I would be becoming her. I realized with a sudden crystalline clarity that revenge is a trap. It requires you to hold on to the pain. You have to nurture the hate, keep it warm, and feed it every day so that it's ready when the moment comes. If I destroyed them now, I would be tied to them forever. I would be the daughter who got even. I would be defined by their darkness. I didn't want to be their daughter anymore. I wanted to be free. I adjusted my grip on the pen. I pressed the tip to the paper. I wrote, "Admit to Platinum Wing, Palliative Care Protocol." I continued writing, the scratch of the pen loud in the silence. Authorized 24-hour private nursing. Approve experimental FTD stabilizer trial. Compassionate use. Dietary consult, soft foods, high calorie. Pain management, morphine drip PARN. I filled the page with orders. I ordered the softest sheets. I ordered the room with the view of the mountains. I ordered the therapy dog visits on Tuesdays. I ordered the life I had never been given, a life of safety, warmth, and unearned grace. I capped the pen. I ripped the carbon copy from the back of the form and held it out to Jean. She took it with shaking hands. She read the orders. She stopped at Platinum Wing. She looked up at me, her face twisting in confusion. "I don't understand," she whispered. This is the VIP floor. This costs thousands a day." "Insurance won't cover all of it," I said, my voice cool and steady. "I'll cover the difference from my stipend." Jean stared at me. Why? It was the only question left. Why not crush them? Why not let them suffer? "Because he is frightened," I said, "and because he is in pain." "But after what we did?" Jean's voice broke. She couldn't finish the sentence. The shame was finally too heavy to lift. I walked over to the window, looking out at the city one last time. "You taught me that people are disposable, Jean. You taught me that when something becomes difficult or broken, you throw it away." I turned back to her. "I am unlearning that lesson. I am a doctor. My job is to preserve dignity even when it isn't deserved, especially when it isn't deserved." I gestured to the sleeping man. "He will stay here until the end. He will be clean. He will be fed. He will be medicated. He will never know the fear of being abandoned in a strange place." John began to weep again, but this time it wasn't the frantic crying of a woman caught in a lie. It was the quiet, humbled weeping of someone receiving a pardon they know they haven't earned. "Thank you," she choked out. "Evelyn—" I held up a hand. The gesture was sharp, clinical. It stopped her dead. "Do not mistake this for forgiveness," I said. The room went still. "I am not doing this for you, and I am certainly not doing it for him. I am doing this so that, when I look in the mirror, I don't see your face looking back at me." I walked to the door. I paused, my hand on the frame. "Mrs. Harrow will handle the admission. The nurses will update you on his condition weekly. You can visit during visiting hours just like everyone else. Will you—" Jean hesitated. "Will you come to see him?" I looked at her and I felt absolutely nothing. The anger was gone. The sadness was gone. There was just a vast, peaceful, empty space where the trauma used to be. "No," I said. "My work here is done. The patient is stable." I stepped out into the hallway and let the door close behind me. Click. The sound was final. It was the sound of a book closing. I walked down the corridor. The nurse's station was buzzing with the midnight shift change. Phones were ringing. Someone was laughing about a coffee order. The world was alive, mundane and beautiful. My steps felt light. For 18 years, I had been carrying a suitcase full of stones. Memories of the cold, the smell of diesel, the feeling of being unlovable. I hadn't realized how heavy it was until I just set it down in Suite 404. I had been waiting for an apology that would never come. I had been waiting for them to fix me, but they couldn't fix me. They were broken themselves, shattered by bad genes and fear. I realized then that the opposite of abuse isn't apology. It's mercy. Apology requires the abuser to change. Mercy only requires the victim to rise. By treating Arthur with dignity, I hadn't just saved him from a state facility. I had saved myself from the cycle. I had broken the chain of neglect. The genetic mutation stopped with me, but more importantly, the cruelty stopped with me. I reached the elevators. I pressed the button. I thought about the 14-year-old girl at the bus station. I thought about how she watched the taillights fade, thinking her life was over. I wanted to tell her that she was wrong. Her life was just beginning. She would build a fortress of glass and steel. She would master the science of the brain. And one day she would have the power to destroy the people who hurt her, and she would choose not to. She would choose peace. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. The doors slid open. The car was empty, bright and clean. I stepped inside. I didn't look back at the hallway. I didn't look back at the door to Suite 404. I turned and faced the front. I pressed the button for the lobby. But in my heart, I knew I wasn't going down. I was rising. The doors closed, and for the first time in 18 years, the silence didn't hurt. And so Evelyn chose mercy over destruction. Have you ever faced a deep betrayal where you had to choose between getting even or breaking the cycle? Don't be shy to share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be the inspiration for our future episodes. We read every single comment. We truly appreciate you being here. There are even more captivating stories waiting for you right on your screen. Please click one now so you don't miss the ending. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.